Good evening. We are now in Daniel chapter 5, and we left off yesterday in verse 5. The king, Belshazzar, who is supposed to be the last of the kings of the kingdom of Babylon, he was in a major celebration with 1,000 of the lords, the leaders, the wife, the concubines. Everybody is there celebrating, drinking their heart out. And suddenly, in a very bright part of the room where the lampstand was, the fingers of a human hand emerged and began writing opposite the lamp on the plaster on the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw, and this one would be vaguely seen, not clear, but he could actually see at the corner of his eye. And what is important here is for us to be aware that it is something that traumatized him. It is something that is scaring him. And we read that he saw the back of the hand that did the writing. He didn't see who, but he saw the hand. And so, with the hand, we come to verse 6. Verse 6 says this: Then, and this was literally, and then, the king's face became pale. Now, this is, I guess you can say, uh, one expression. There are two words here that we need to look at in the Aramaic. The first word here is the brightness. This would be the splendor. And as the king was celebrating, obviously his face was bright. And that's the description, that his splendor. And then the second word here is that it was altered. Now, the idea of altered means it's changed and it was transformed, meaning the brightness of the face of the king, that he was so elated, he was celebrating, he was so happy, and that face changed. And then it says here, and his thoughts disturbed him. This word alarm literally means to frighten him. So alarm him, frightened him. It is something that he didn't understand. The next one here is his hip joints loosened. Now, this is not the correct translation. This is not the hip joints, it is the belt. His belt that he was wearing around his hip came loose. And then it says here his knees began knocking together. Now, all of these is actually trying to give us the impression that he was shocked and he was frightened. Something that is very hard to describe using words. But I think it suffices to let us understand that his belt suddenly broke, if you want to call it that way, and his knees began knocking together in a terrifying manner. What the king next did was this. Verse 7, it says here, the king called out, cried out loud to bring in the sorcerers. These would be the necromancers, those who were trying to read information using bones and the skull. The Chaldeans, these are the local sages, and the diviners, the astrologers, the ones who are looking at the sun, moon, and stars to look for answers. These were the ones that the king naturally gravitated to. Now remember, we are now in the era of Belshazzar. He's the co-regent. His father, Nabonidus, is in Arabia somewhere, busy with his newfound love of the god of sin. And then the king began speaking and said to the wise men of Babylon, he says, anyone who can read this inscription and explain its understanding to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as third in the kingdom. Now, this is important to understand. And so let us give it a little bit of interpretation. So he was desperate. He was looking for his standard uh, advisors. And in so doing, he was prepared to give a reward. And the reward is clothed with purple, necklace of gold. These would be instantly made a noble of the land. And as a noble of the land, he would also wear a necklace where it's a medallion with a medallion, meaning he is conferred as someone who is very special. And then it says he has authority over a third. Now, this word idea here is tal there, which is coming from the word talat. It is third or a third. So it has two possible meanings. This is in the Aramaic number of 3. And it gives us an idea of a third of the kingdom. But I think more likely is this. He is number 3 of the kingdom. Now, this is important because we had already identified Nabonidus. He is the king. And then Belshazzar is the co-regent. And so this person would be number 3. Belshazzar is actually number 2, and Nabonidus is number 1. And that is probably what this word actually means. I don't think that Belshazzar was about to give rule of a third of the kingdom, but he would be ranked number 3. I think that would be a way of looking at this, considering the fact that Belshazzar is currently number 2. Although he's called king, he is not the absolute king. He is the one who is ruling on behalf of his father. And so the only level that he could give is the next level, which is number 3. We come to verse 8. Verse 8 says, and then all the wise men came in, the ones that the king summoned, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. The idea here is they can't even read what was written on the wall. So how can they even give understanding? Now, this word interpret is to give understanding. And obviously, the king won't understand since the sages, the wise men, they couldn't even read. So there is no way that anyone in Babylon at that time would be able to make any sense out of the writing on the wall. Verse 9. And then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and this is the word greatly frightened. That is what it means. Right, just now he was frightened, now he is greatly frightened. And his face, although the splendor changed, it grew pale. Now, this word face grew pale does not literally mean pale. It says here the splendor his face, the splendor of his face, changed. And in this case, changed even more. And the nobles, they themselves, as the ones who are looking and with him, were even more perplexed. They were confused. This word here is confused. Now, there is a reason why they are confused, is because we are reading this. They could not read the inscription and so cannot give understanding. And the confusion was this: the writing was in Aramaic. Why can't they understand? At least the letters were all in Aramaic. And so the nobles were confused. What happened? Was it in a different language? And so now we read this. The queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles, meaning she could hear all the responses and the exchange of words. And the queen began to speak and say, and this idea is that the queen wants to give her opinion. And so we have this standard Eastern well wish. Whenever you talk to the king, it says, "O king, live forever." And this word does not mean live forever. This word means live for a long time. It is an expression to wish the king long life. And so it says, "Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale." Again, I want to point out to you that this word alarm is frightened, and this word face is splendor, and this word pale is change. Don't let your face be changed. And this is because the queen knows the history of what has happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 11. Verse 11 says this: there is a man. And this word is not just there is, this word literally means there exists. There exists a man. And this word man literally means a certain man who is, I guess you can say, who is of great strength, who is an authority. So he's not just any man, it's not a mortal man, it doesn't refer to a mortal man, but a man who has certain powers, certain strengths. And it says, as in the kingdom, in your kingdom, in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. And so we see this, the wind, he has the wind or the disposition of the angels, people of the angelic realm. And in the days of your father Nebuchadnezzar, there is brilliance. The word illumination here means that there was enlightenment. There was enlightenment, illumination. There was insight, and insight here would be understanding. And there is wisdom, and wisdom gives us extra insight. Like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And when we talk about gods here, it would be angels as well. And this word is not referring to the God in the sky, but it's those angelic beings of a different realm. And Nebuchadnezzar, your father, had appointed the king. Now, this word here has appointed. Your father, the king Nebuchadnezzar, and I think we could say this: your father, the king, had appointed him chief of the priests. These are not priests, these are the necromancers, these are the sages, people who are able to advise the king with wisdom and insight. Sorcerers, uh, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the demonologists, the diviners, the people who can do magic by your father, the king. And he says, this was because an extraordinary spirit, a superior spirit. And this is something which Belshazzar doesn't know, that he has knowledge, which is experience. He's got insight and ability to interpret dreams. He's able to explain riddles, or he has knowledge of riddles. He can solve difficult problems. And this idea of solve difficult problems is this: he can loose knots. Remember, in the Eastern language, it are very concrete. And so when you got knots and you can untie knots, so he can solve problems. Was found in this man, Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will reveal to you or declare to you the understanding. Verse 13 says, then Daniel, and this is literally after this, Daniel was brought in before the king. The king began to say this to Daniel. He says, are you that Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, who is a son of the exile, whom my father the king brought from Judah? And so here it is important then, it says here, are you one of the sons of Judah who came from exile? Now I've heard that you have a spirit of the angels, and in you that illumination, which is enlightenment, understanding, and extraordinary insight have been found in you that nobody else have. Just now, the wise men and the necromancers, the sages, and the astrologers were brought in before me to read this inscription, the writing, and make its interpretation, give me the understanding, but they could not declare the interpretation of the message, of the matter. Now, this is because they did not understand what was written and they couldn't read. Verse 16, but I personally have heard about you from the queen that you are able to give understanding and solve difficult problems, meaning to loosen knots. Now, if you are able to read the writing, this is what it means. If you're able to read the writing and declare its understanding to be known to me, you will be clothed in purple like a noble. You will wear a medallion of gold around your neck. You will be conferred, and you will have authority as the third in the kingdom, which I would understand this to be the third ruler or the third in position in the kingdom. And then we have these words. Daniel replied and said before the king, you can keep, I said, all these, you can keep it to yourself or give your reward to someone else. This is not an arrogant statement, but basically, Daniel is not doing it for any gifts. He doesn't need gifts because his ability didn't come by himself. The understanding of all these things came from God. So he's not there to profit from it. However, I will read the writing to the king, and then I will declare the understanding known to him. And this is important. The understanding of all these mysteries, the secrets that's being revealed, is not a natural phenomena that Daniel had in himself. Information and knowledge of such things really come from God. And if God does not reveal it to Daniel, Daniel will never understand it. And hence, we need now to know what is being said. Verse 18 says, O King, the Most High God. Now, this word here, the Most High God, is Elaha Ilaah, right? Elaha Ilaah, the Most High God. And Nebuchadnezzar understands this because in chapter 4, his high and lofty arrogance was brought down to the lowest earth. That he has to learn that as a king of Babylon, how great the splendor and majesty could be. The greater one above will have the last say, and that is the God Most High. He granted sovereignty. He gave you the kingdom, the greatness, the honor, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar, your father, so that you can continue to be king. And now, because of the greatness which God had granted him, all the peoples, nations, and languages trembled and fear in his presence. Whomever the king wished, he killed, and whomever he wished, he spared alive, and whomever he wished, he elevated, and whomever he wished, he humbled. Now, this whole idea here is about what God had given. This is God granted to Nebuchadnezzar this power because now Nebuchadnezzar really understands as king of Babylon, this is a sacred authority that was granted by the God above. But when his heart was arrogant and his spirit became so overbearing, he behaved presumptuously. Now, what does this mean? Now, this passage tells us when he became arrogant and proud, his spirit became so overbearing. Now, the word overbearing was he became very stubborn, and then he behaved presumptuously. He dealt wickedly. That he became to exceed. He exceeded his pride. And this makes a person go beyond his normal self. Then he was deposed from his royal throne. His dignity was taken away from him. And this is about Daniel chapter 4, that he suddenly became an animal, went out and lived among the animals and ate grass. And this was for a 7-year period because God changed him. Verse 21, he was driven away from mankind. The word mankind is mortal mankind. And his heart was made of that of animals. And this word heart is literally the mind. He was made the mind. So his mind was that of animals. And his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He ate grass like a cattle. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he recognized, until he knew and experienced the Most High God. And this would be Elaha Ilaah, is ruler over all of humankind, and he set it whomever he wishes. This is to remind Belshazzar that Nebuchadnezzar, the most glorious of the kings, had experienced this. And yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart even though you knew all this. This is a rebuke. You have not humbled or lowered your mind and whatever you do, because even you knew all this, you heard all this from the words that were given, because Nebuchadnezzar had written the letter to everyone. And so everything is well known. And Daniel rebuked him. You knew about this, and yet you continued to abuse the instruments and the implements of the house of the God of the Jews. Verse 23. But you have risen against the Lord of heavens. This is the Mare. Now, understand this is an Aramaic word. It's similar to Adoni. And so this word here is Mare, of heaven. And you have brought the vessels of his house. Now, this is very important because he has uh, he has done things to offend God and try to do shameful things against God's vessels. And they have brought out the vessels of his house before you, you and your nobles, your wife, your concubine, been drinking wine out of them. And you have praised the gods of silver, gold, copper, iron, wood, and stone, which, this is important, they do not see, they do not hear, they do not understand. And that's the difference. You have taken the vessel of the house of God and you have treated the other gods more important. But the God in whose hand are your life breath and all your ways you have not glorified. That they know that this is the Creator, the one who gave him the power to be king. And so, what is important now is, and then the hand was sent from God, and this writing was written out. And this is the warning. And so, let me read this. Now, this writing that was written, this is the writing. Why is it that they could not read the writing? They could not read the writing because it was not because it wasn't written in Aramaic, but it was written differently. So let me just briefly write it on the screen here. Now, Daniel read the words, and the words that Daniel read was this: Mene, mene, tekel, farsin, which is this: Mene, mene, tekel, farsin. And in the Aramaic and the Hebrew, and notice our writings here is actually using the Aramaic script, which means that we can actually read in the script. But why is it that the sages couldn't read? And that's because one of the comments was that it wasn't written in a normal fashion. Instead of writing it from right to left, the writing was written from top to bottom. Now, obviously, the hand that wrote it had written this mem mem tav vav samek, nun nun kuf fe yud, then aleph aleph lamet resh and nun sofit. So what we would probably do is that when they actually read it from this side, it doesn't make any sense at all. It has no meaning. And that's why the sages couldn't read. They can see the letters, but it has no meaning. But when Daniel read it, he read it top to bottom. And so he could actually read this: Mene, mene, Tekel Upharsin. And that is the reading that Daniel had given. And so, with this, Daniel, after reading, can now give the interpretation, the understanding. As Daniel read it, he gave the explanation. In verse 26, it says, "This is the interpretation of the matter, of the message, of the word." And it says here, mene. The word mene means this. Now, the word mene is actually a weight. In the Babylonian era, you would find that in those places, even in Israel, in Canaan, in Babylon, Syria, in Egypt, all the money that is being exchanged is all based on weights. And here would be a mene. Mene is a weight. And so in Hebrew, we have the shekel. They're all weights. But here in Babylon, they use this mene. And so it says here, mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. So there is a judgment. So mene, mene. The next word here is tekel. And tekel is the fact that you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. This word deficient is wanting or lacking. Basically, the idea here is we have a weighing scale, and in the weighing scale, there is a mene weight, and you are up here, and it says that you cannot balance the weights. The last word here is Upharsin. Now, Upharsin is actually a division. Upharsin, you can think of it as a division of two. This word is peres, that is to divide into two. And so you take the mene and you split it into two. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And hence this word divide into two is from one kingdom into two kingdoms, Medes and Persia. Now, Medes and Persia are the emerging kingdoms. Though they are two kingdoms, they intermarried and became the Medo-Persian kingdom. They operated as one kingdom. And so God has said, we've taken your kingdom and divided and gave it out to two. And so this is the meaning of the words. This word Upharsin is actually about dividing, the division, or the breaking into two, break into two. So divide into two whatever you have, because God is rejecting you. You are found lacking. When you are weighed on the scale with a mene, you can't balance your books. Now that is what the interpretation is. Now, when Belshazzar heard all these things, uh, he had a different reaction. In verse 28, where we have talked about the division of the kingdom, after Belshazzar heard it, And then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple as a noble, put a medallion of gold around his neck. He was conferred as someone very important. And then he issued a decree concerning Daniel that he now has authority as a third, number three in the kingdom. Belshazzar honored. Now, the interesting thing is this: he was the one who was terrified with the news. And when he heard the news that his kingdom was going to be divided, instead of being more terrified, he came away now knowing the end of his story. That is what it means. Verse 30, and I want to pay attention to these two verses. That night, that same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. And this is an important news. Where was he killed? What was this all about? This whole situation was that Belshazzar had been king. He was the last king. And that night, when he says Belshazzar, the king, was killed, it also meant that Babylon fell. Now, this is part and parcel of a well-known narrative in history taken from the Cyrus stele, a historical artifact that recorded what Cyrus did when he came in to conquer Babylon. Now, what really happened was this. When the Medo-Persian Empire, which is the Medes and the Persians, came against Babylon, and at the time where Belshazzar was having a feast, drink so much wine until they were drunk, that same night, they literally became drunk with wine, and they were incapacitated. And what the Darius the Mede, it says here Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about age of 62. This Darius the Mede was very much a title. I don't think you can call it the name. It is actually the title. The title of the king of, I guess you can call it the king of Medo-Persia. And basically, that would be the king that temporarily took power in Babylon. According to history, the army of the Medo-Persian Empire did not really attack Babylon. Babylon was heavily fortified. Thick walls. You can't break them. You can't fight them. But the river Euphrates seems to have flown into the city. And what the Medo-Persian king did was to divert the waters from the Euphrates River and drained it in such a way where they could crawl under the wall. And when they went into the city, the water was not very deep. And they went in and did not meet any resistance. Why? Because they were all drunk. They weren't able to fight. All the leaders were drunk. And so Babylon fell where they had no leaders to lead the charge against the Medo-Persian Empire. And history had it that the Persian invasion in 539 BCE by Cyrus had conferred the city to Darius. And that's a title. And maybe that was a title that was taken. And Babylon just fell, just like that. Because God said so. And God gave the message to Belshazzar, and he died that same night. And so when the soldiers came, we in secular history we don't have it recorded. We are not told exactly how Belshazzar died, not in the secular history, but we do know that he died, obviously, and somebody killed him, or the Persians managed to kill him, and we are then told that it seems to be on the same night that Babylon fell. And with this, we can now tell that this was the end of the empire. And the end of the empire came at the end of 70 years. And somehow we need to then begin to understand that there was a requirement to go back to Judah at the end of 70 years. But is this the end of 70 years? That is something that was a miscalculation on the part of Belshazzar, because it was commonly understood that he calculated from the time Nebuchadnezzar had come into power. But it was not to be. It has to be the time of Daniel chapter 1, where Daniel was brought to Babylon, and that would be at least 1 year thereafter Nebuchadnezzar became king. And so that would come in chapter 6. And with this, we'll come to the end of our session today.